Hey there, friends. Welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV. So the state of Washington has sued over 30,000 water users for water rights. And I want to explain exactly what's going on here and why you should be concerned, even though you probably don't live in Washington. So the state of Washington is asking 30,000 water users to prove that they have rights to use the water that they're using. They sent out 30,000 letters via certified mail. An adult has to sign for these letters. I mean, this is the real deal. And they're asking these water users to prove that they have water rights. The State Department of Ecology filed the Water Resource Inventory Area 1, WRIA 1, watershed adjudication with Watcom Superior Court last year. The adjudication is the legal process where the government decides who has water rights and who doesn't. The state must now quantify what those rights are and how they apply. And this watershed is in the Nooksack Basin area. So these forms and letters that have been being sent out are just kind of the first step in the process. From what I understand, from the date you receive the letter, you have about an entire year to return that letter, at least until late 2025. So the parties that are actually being sued in this, the ones that have to prove their water rights, include everybody but those who are on public utilities. So it includes indigenous tribes, governments, a lot of people who live in rural areas, and of course, farms. All of these people are going to have to tell the court how much water they use, when they started using it, and whether or not they're on a permit exempt well, they still have to record this information because water, as we know, belongs to the government. It doesn't belong to the people. So these actions are not out of the blue. They're actually a part of a settlement that happened back in 2016, I believe, Watcom County versus Hearst. Yeah, in Hearst, the court held that local jurisdictions planning under the Growth Management Act have a duty to determine legal and physical water availability for development and cannot simply defer to Department of Ecology's adopted rules. And, you know, they've had some problems with this. One of the cities out there, I can't remember the name of it, but they drilled a well so deep that they actually drained out a couple other water associations. So this is actually a fairly big deal. They probably need to figure out who's using water, how they're using it, so that they can properly allocate water to future developments and they don't have those types of issues again. And of course, part of this is also to make sure there's enough water for the salmon. So tribes and local communities have tried to work out, you know, a lot of the logistics of this beforehand, but basically at this point in time, they have given up on what's the best course of action. And so it's been turned over to the courts to decide, you know, does this person have water rights? How much water can they use? Who are we going to cut off? So Perry Eskridge and Fred Leekle, in an op-ed to the Cascadia Daily News, said that the impacts on the salmon actually lie further up the river and accuse the government of failing leadership duties and abandoning the community in an enormous, expensive lawsuit, with farmers and rural residents left in the lurk. They said the saddest irony of this litigation is that farms lacking sufficient water rights for irrigation will suddenly, and I apologize for the pigs and the chickens, this is where I live. Anyway, the saddest irony of this litigation is that farms lacking sufficient water rights for irrigation will suddenly have immense pressure for housing development. With housing water easy to obtain, any agricultural entity that loses sufficient access to water or has junior water rights may have a few options but to convert that farmland to housing development. I think that this is also a big concern, and this is where it should concern you. According to water rights attorney Joseph Brogan, those water users who cannot prove that they have used all the water shown on their claim or water rights certificate are mostly agricultural users within this region. They're going to be disadvantaged in the lawsuit. To give you a little bit more background on why the farmers are going to be disadvantaged on the lawsuit, Henry Bierlenk, who is the director of the Washington Red Raspberry Commission, has put out a lot of information on this subject, particularly with farmers. And Washington, they produce a lot of produce. And one of my concerns in our country is that we've been slowly producing less and less produce and relying on more produce to come in from overseas. Some of that has to do with our labor laws. We keep pushing all these farm labor laws. It's pushing farmers away from being able to afford farm labor. And then, there's also been a lot of holdups with the border that have impacted H-2A programs for farm workers to come over here because of an overburdensome logistics because of the amount of people trying to cross the border. But the U.S. has slowly been producing less and less of produce on our own, which is a food security issue. If you think about it, what would happen if we ended up in World War III and we weren't producing our own produce? So I wanted to just kind of go over real quick before I get too much into what Henry has to say about this and why farms are going to be impacted, and just talk about and this is fast, what products we get from Washington. So Washington ranks number 1 in the nation's agriculture for raspberries. They produce about 92.3% of raspberries. Hold on to that number. Let's see, they produce hops, spearmint oil, wrinkled seed peas. These are all things that they're ranked number 1 on. Cherries, apples, pears, grapes, carrots, green peas, sweet corn. They're ranked number 2 on asparagus, peppermint oil, dry edible peas, Niagara grapes, potatoes, onions, lentils, apricots. They're ranked number 2 on all grapes. Number 2 on nectarines. I like nectarines. They're good. They're ranked number 3 on tart cherries and prunes and plums. Ranked number 4 for all wheat. Fresh market sweet corn. Ranked number 5 for blueberries, cranberries, strawberries. So, I mean, when you look at all these fresh foods that come out of a state like Washington, and you think about where they rank in terms of production in the United States, it is a very important agricultural state. And what you're looking at here, I'm going to get into a little bit of what Henry has to say, but what you're looking at here, just in the raspberry industry, is possibly a 25 to 40% reduction in farms because of this water lawsuit. So according to Henry, he says, I would say a majority of the farmers do not have everything they need in terms of water rights. When irrigation systems became the norm around the 1950s and 60s, all farms went through the water rights application process. In 1990, the state promised that they would work with the farmers if they submitted applications to legalize their water use. As a result, over 300 water rights applications were submitted to the state of Watcom farmers after 1990. Only a handful have ever been processed. So a lot of farms, just from that application process, are still in limbo. Now, we're talking a lot more than 300 here. 30,000 water users. They still haven't processed applications from the 1990s. And so these farms still can't prove that they have rights to the use. Rather than relinquishing the water unused by drip irrigation, farmers applied to transfer the extra water to unpermitted fields in close proximity. The state helped with that process. Crucial to a water right is the assertion that the specific amount of water permitted will be used for a specific pre-approved purpose and place. However, after 2020, when the state began to float the idea of an adjudication, it changed its approach to the farmers abruptly. So what this state has done is a broken promise, as the adjudication will make nearly all the applications denied. The adjudication will make it impossible to spread the saved excess water to the unpermitted fields. The law reads that if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, he said. This has been the law since 1967. And this is why he thinks 25 to 40%, this is, somebody who would know this information, of just the raspberry producers will be wiped out. If you think about 25 to 40% of the producers of everything I just listed off being wiped out due to a lack of water, apples, grapes, you're talking about the number one producer, the state that is the number one producer of these crops. And we're already in this situation where we've lost a lot of these types of crops to imports. A lot of local farmers are feeling the same way. What they're saying is that water rights are determined based on seniority. If the city has senior water rights over their farm, they supersede them. The problem is there's a ton of unchecked urban sprawl. These kinds of things are what is going to take their water rights away from the farmers, even though we have water rights, or they should have water rights. They've been using the water for a century. There's a huge discrepancy over how it is going to be determined simply because the state is going to get to decide. But at what point does city expansion and increased water demand force the farmers to face restrictions? That's what this is all about. And this is an interesting question, though, with urban sprawl and development. I was just reading the other day that developers for Disney paid over $100,000 an acre out where we are for this new Disney living experience. And they're making land literally unaffordable in some of these places. It's really kind of annoying because you buy a farm, you want to be able to expand your acreage, expand your productivity, and the cost per acre goes from $5,000 to $15,000 to $20,000. And now you have these developers pumping in over $100,000 an acre. There's just no way you can keep up with that stuff. I wanted to talk a little bit about how long this process actually takes and when you can expect to see a shortfall in produce because of this, because it's not going to be something that happens overnight. It's not going to be something that happens very, very quickly. There was another adjudication process in Yakima County in eastern Washington that took 42 years to finally be resolved in 2019 after initial filings in 1977. Okay, so this is a process that has already in the past taken 42 years, but that was with only 4,000 wells and water rights to be considered. And of that, approximately 2,500 to 2,800 were actually approved. So this process will take away water rights from farmers. It already has in the past, but it is also going to take a considerable amount of time. And the more time that goes by, in another 42 years, that was with 4,000. This is 30,000, okay? So by the time they get through this process, how much development and urban sprawl will there have been, and how many new organizations will there be to get senior water rights over the farmers? At what point, you have to question this, at what point do we put food production, putting fresh food on people's plates, keeping food local to the United States even, at what point does that become a priority? And are we pushing ourselves into a greater position of food insecurity here in the United States, in the developed world? This is a question for a lot of developed countries as they sprawl out of control. I'm sorry, 2,300 to 2,500 actually got approved of that 4,000. Many of you have noticed that we keep wearing these leather patch hats that say Defend the Right to Farm on them. These leather patch hats support our nonprofit, Meet My Neighbor Productions. You can get your hat at Yanasa Trading Co. and help us defend the right to farm through education, outreach, and, as we've been doing over the last couple of years, farm relief efforts. So get your leather patch hat and let others know that you defend the right to farm. So I don't know, guys, what's happening in Washington is actually a very big deal. I mean, this isn't, the entire state of Washington, but this is something that has happened in Washington before. It's happening again, and we're going to continue to see this fight over water as we go into the future, especially with the Pacific Northwest. You're seeing it in California, you're seeing it in Oregon, and we depend on those areas for a significant amount of produce grown here in the United States. So it is alarming, it's concerning, and farmers don't come first. You have a lot of these advocacy groups that are out there fighting farmers around every corner, saying that they're destroying the environment. But then who's coming in behind them? Well, it's not necessarily conservation projects, but it's often entire cities that are coming in behind them, and entire developments that are coming in behind them and taking these water rights. And then you have data centers that are also coming in and taking water rights. Everybody, water is like gold these days. It's worth more than gold. It's worth more than oil. It is the lifeblood of this country. It is the lifeblood of the ability to produce food. And, no, they're not making any more water. I think, our ecosystem has the right amount of carbon, it has the right amount of water. It doesn't necessarily create more, it gets displaced. And these cities, literally, like that one city's well, literally dried out several groups, water associations, just from one city. It's interesting. It's almost as if we're being pushed into a future where a lot of these rural communities are going to be unlivable. They're gonna bankrupt them, and the only place where we could go are into cities. Anyway, guys, I hope you found that information as interesting as I did, and stay tuned. I've got a lot more to talk about, but I try and do at least one of these a day to just share with you what's going on and the challenges that farmers across our country are facing on a regular basis.
Ancient eras and natural selection have refined and tailored pristine fibers with the resilience for today's days. Evolving beyond the last ice age, bison wool is nature's most dependable activewear. Buffalo Wool Company, 100% proven by nature, 100% American made.
Check out the Buffalo Wool Company collection at yanasatradingco.com.